Things move quickly in the electric car world. In 2018, when Jaguar launched the I-Pace, it beat BMW, Audi and Mercedes in bringing a premium electric SUV to the market. And even without much direct competition at the time, it proved to be a fantastic electric car.
But it didn't take long for its rivals to catch up. In barely 3 years since then, the EV landscape is totally different. Where the I-Pace's only real rivals at launch had Tesla badges, now it's up against the Audi E-tron, Mercedes EQC, BMW iX3 and Volvo XC40 Recharge, with many more to come. The British brand has also announced its plans to become electric only from 2025, which is big news. And should we be excited for its future? Or has this once trailblazing premium electric SUV been overtaken and left behind by its new rivals just a few years into its life?
Well, it's just had some updates and we're driving the new I-Pace. And in this video, we're going to tell you all the changes and we'll tell you everything else that you need to know about the car. Before we get stuck into that, save thousands of pounds off your next new car on whatcar.com and do subscribe to our channel if you want to see all of our other new car reviews. Let's first talk about what's new with these model year updates, starting with a few new paint choices like this Portofino blue. The 18-inch alloys that were standard on S trim have been replaced with bigger 19-inch alloys, but we've got the optional 20-inch alloys here. There's also now a chrome style finish to the grille, plus you can add an optional bright pack, which we've got on this car, and gives you this chrome surround, as well as a few other flashy bits of trim on the door mirrors, the rear diffuser and the window surrounds. But hang on, why does it have a grille? Because if it's an electric car, then it doesn't have an engine that needs cooling. Well, I'm glad you asked, because this apparently does serve a functional purpose to a certain extent. The grille, you can see, is filled in, but down here, this allows air to pass through and help keep the batteries cool, while this directs the air through the bonnet vent, accelerating the airflow over the wipers onto the base of the windscreen, thus reducing aerodynamic drag, apparently. I know this isn't new, but while we're talking aero, at the rear of the car, apparently the airflow is powerful enough to be one of the reasons that you don't have a rear windscreen wiper. There's also a special hydrophobic coating on the glass as well. So the air comes through so powerfully up here and through the back that it just blows the water off the rear windscreen, which is great when you're on the motorway, but not quite so useful when you're just reversing in the rain. Anyway, back to the new stuff, and the I-Pace now has a 3-phase 11 kilowatt onboard charger. Previously, it only had a single-phase 7 kilowatt onboard charger. Now that means if you have an 11 kilowatt home wall box, you can now charge at 11 kilowatts and get a 0 to 100% charge in around 9 hours. Previously, if you had an 11 kilowatt home wall box charger, you could only charge at 7 kilowatts, which would get you the same amount of charge in almost 13 hours. And you can, of course, still fast charge your I-Pace, and we'll talk more about that later.
The interior changes bring some extra equipment. The 360-degree 3D camera now comes as standard, plus the ClearSight digital rearview mirror, which we first saw in the Range Rover Evoque, is now available as an option. Both front seats are heated as standard, and there's wireless phone charging across the lineup too. The optional Meridian sound system now has an extra 2 speakers up here. There's also a cabin air ionization system as well. The system can be used with the I-Pace's preconditioning system to clear the cabin of allergens.
But perhaps the biggest news inside is this updated infotainment system. So now it has Jaguar Land Rover's Pivi Pro system, which before this you could only find on the Land Rover Defender. It's got the same physical layout and setup as before. So up here you've got a 10-inch screen with a 5-inch screen lower down here. But if you go for a Jaguar I-Pace S, the entry-level trim, then this lower screen is an optional extra. And without it, you get a kind of touch-sensitive button layout instead. So now the infotainment system has a revamped menu layout and the navigation system has been updated as well. But you get Apple CarPlay and Android Auto as standard, so surely you're just better off using Google Maps or Waze anyway, as you would be in any other car. And the system itself isn't the best out there. So the problems with it are that it can still be a little bit laggy when you're jumping between the different functions. And also there's quite a lot of menus and sub-menus, and it's quite baffling to try and get your head around it all. Plus, these icons are still quite small. They were on the previous model, and now they've kind of moved them around a little bit, but they're still quite small, which means that if you're driving, it's just difficult to hit them accurately. And so when you compare it to the BMW iX3 and the Mercedes EQC, they both have better systems, partly because they offer some level of physical control to use the infotainment system with a rotary dial in the BMW iX3's case. You do still have physical dials in the I-Pace for the climate controls, and these actually work quite well. So you push them in to control the seat heating, and you pull them out again to control the fan speed and the temperature. And actually, even though there is some element of touchscreen complicatedness in the middle, this actually works pretty well. Just like before, you also still get a 12.3-inch digital driver display, which is good, nice and bright and clear. You can also choose what you're looking at by using these controls on the steering wheel. And also they look like they might be touch sensitive controls, but they're actual buttons that you need to press, which is good, because if they were touch sensitive, you can sometimes be accidentally turning things on that you don't mean to be, like we have seen in the new VW ID.3, for example, but no such problems here. And generally, this is a very impressive interior. We said when the I-Pace was first launched that it was Jaguar's best interior, and a few years on, that does still remain the case. The materials are very good, and the fit and finish generally is impressive, but you can see there's a bit of wobbles here and there, so it's not quite consistent throughout the entire interior, which is why ultimately the Audi E-tron is a bit better for fit and finish, because it is put together a little better. But it is extremely boring by comparison. The I-Pace does feel really special inside, and it's quite practical too. So you've got a lot of storage trays like this wireless phone charging up here, somewhere to put the key or a pen there, a couple of cup holders, and this massive central bin here. You can even take these cup holders out. So all things considered, not much has changed really, but it is still a very good interior up front. There's enough room for a couple of 6-footers to properly lounge out and feel pretty comfortable in the back of the I-Pace here. You can see I'm just under 6 foot. Legroom is good, headroom, no problem really. Decent amount available there. And it's more spacious back here than in the back of the iX3 or the Mercedes EQC. But you have got a bit of a sloping and curving roofline, and these windows are quite small. So an Audi E-tron does feel a bit more spacious and open back here. Plus, these rear seats don't really do anything particularly clever. In an iX3, you can recline the outer rear seats, but in the I-Pace, you do have some trays under the seats in the back here, but they're a bit awkward to get to because you can't pull them out, and they've got this nasty feeling plastic on the entry point. You have a couple of Isofix mounts on the outer rear seats, plus you can pull this down for an armrest and a couple of cup holders. You can even fold this entire seat down completely to give yourself very easy access to the boot or to put your skis through. But there isn't a 7-seat option in the I-Pace. It is 5-seat only, which means the Tesla Model X remains, for now, the only 7-seat electric SUV. The I-Pace's boot isn't the biggest around, but you still wouldn't describe it as small. We managed to fit 7 carry-on size suitcases into the boot below the parcel shelf here, which by comparison, the Audi E-tron and also the iX3 managed to fit 8 suitcases, and the Model S got a ridiculous 11 into its boot. But still, here you can see simple shape, easy proportions, and a decent amount of underfloor storage for the charging cables, but not much else. It's also handy, you might think, having an extra boot in the front where the engine would have been. Or not. I can just about fit my phone in the front here, but not much else. Anyway, let's go for a drive. So the first thing to point out is that these updates haven't really had any impact on how the I-Pace drives. So it's still got a 90 kilowatt-hour battery pack. It's got 2 electric motors, one on the front axle, one on the rear axle, making it all-wheel drive. And it has 395 brake horsepower, which is a lot, and it has a 0 to 60 miles per hour time of just 4.5 seconds, which is properly rapid. Admittedly, not quite as quick as what a Tesla Model S offers, but still, compared to pretty much everything else on the road, that is very quick indeed. But with the I-Pace, it's not just about straight line acceleration, because it also handles pretty well too. The batteries are beneath the floor, so it's got a nice low center of gravity. It also has a claimed 50-50 weight distribution as well, front to rear. And when you're on a twisty road, behind the wheel with this nice, precise, well-weighted steering, it is good to drive. It definitely doesn't feel like a high-riding SUV.
part of that sensation comes from the slightly more saloon-like driving position you get, with the I-Pace sitting you a bit closer to the ground than the e-tron and the EQC.
This can tackle a corner way better than those cars as well. In the e-tron and in the EQC, there's a lot more body lean.
But while the I-Pace is good to drive, there is now one other electric SUV that is actually better.
The I-Pace has swatted away competition from the e-tron and the EQC in the handling stakes, but the BMW iX3 does have it beaten. It's even more agile and enjoyable to drive, and with the I-Pace there does come a point where you feel it has too much power for what it's able to handle. And the stability control can be very abrupt in its interventions. Now, admittedly, you do need to be going very quickly for that to be noticeable, but even in normal driving, the iX3, it's got slightly nicer steering, it's got better body control, it's a really, really good SUV. But so too is the I-Pace, and if out and out performance is your thing, then this is comfortably quicker than the iX3. It's also all-wheel drive, whereas the BMW is rear-wheel drive only. Now, we're not claiming that the I-Pace is some Defender-esque off-road king, but it has got some mud and snow settings. It's also got hill ascent and descent controls.
And if you tick the optional air suspension, then you can adjust its ride height too, which is handy for the treacherous Surrey terrain this will no doubt be tasked with braving.
Which brings us on to the ride. Now, on the 18-inch alloys you could get before with the standard passive suspension, the I-Pace was a really comfortable thing. Now that you can only get 19-inch alloys as the smallest wheels, we suspect it's probably going to be a little bit firmer, but should still be a pretty comfortable electric car. We've got 20-inch alloys on this test car with adaptive suspension, both of which will cost extra. But if you fork out for it, you do still get a very comfortable electric car. It absorbs initial impacts really well off the road, much better than something like an EQC. But when you have got this in comfort mode with this adaptive suspension, then there is quite a bit of movement in the car, but it doesn't become uncomfortable, and you can also tighten it up by putting it in dynamic mode. Although if you do that, you get quite a few more audible thumps through the suspension, but it's still nothing like you'd experience in the EQC. And generally, this is a comfortable car that seems very well suited to British tarmac.
An e-tron is ultimately more comfortable and quieter, and actually that is the benchmark of EV comfort. The iX3, even without sophisticated air suspension, is also really well controlled and comfortable.
We've spoken about how quick the I-Pace is, but what about slowing down? Well, you have regenerative braking like you do in every other electric car. So when you lift off the accelerator, the car will slow itself down. There are two different settings for it, high and low. But the annoying thing is, to switch between them, you've got to dive into the infotainment system, find various different menus and sub-menus, and then finally get to it. So it's annoying, it's as complicated as that. But the good thing is that when you decide what setting you want to use, the car will stay in that setting even if you turn it off, leave, come back to the car. So when you start it again, it will remain in whatever it was in before, which is quite useful because probably you're just going to get in this, stick it on high, and then forget about it. But it's annoying that the same doesn't happen for the drive mode. So if you stick it in eco while you're driving, then you stop, get out, come back, it will go back to its default comfort setting. It won't stay in eco, which can be a little bit irritating. Another annoying thing, the view out the back. Yes, you've got a nice swooping roofline, but it does result in quite a letterbox view out the back of the car, which I guess is another reason to consider going for this optional rear view mirror camera. But overall, driving the I-Pace is a pleasant, comfortable, enjoyable experience. Even now, these updates haven't changed anything really, and it's got a lot more electric car rivals that it's up against. It still stacks up very well indeed. But what else do you need to know about the Jaguar I-Pace? It's priced from £65,000 to £75,000, which isn't cheap, but it is very similar to the pricing of the Audi E-tron and the Mercedes EQC, although the BMW iX3 is a little bit cheaper. Also, the I-Pace has been around for a little longer than those rivals, so there are a few more choices to be had on the used market. The I-Pace also starts to look pretty good value when you consider its official range, which is 292 miles. Now, admittedly, that's further than the E-tron, the iX3 and the EQC, but with all of those cars, it's difficult to achieve that claimed official range. But in our official independent testing, we recorded a result of 253 miles from a full charge in the I-Pace, which is very good indeed. However, just bear in mind, if you aren't fussed about a premium badge, there are a growing number of more mainstream electric SUVs that offer similarly impressive ranges for a lot less money.
When it comes to charging the I-Pace up, we've already talked about the new 11 kilowatt onboard charger, but just like before, the maximum charging speed accepted by the car is 100 kilowatts. And that's great, and means from a rapid charger you can get a 0 to 80% charge in about 40 minutes. The problem is 100 kilowatt chargers are still quite rare in the UK. More common are 50 kilowatt chargers, where you'll get a 0 to 80% charge in about 85 minutes. But all of those EVs are at the mercy of third-party charging networks, which are improving but still complicated to use and poorly maintained. All Teslas have a huge advantage here by having access to the American brand's absolutely fantastic supercharger network.
The I-Pace is really well equipped. Even entry-level S trim comes with loads of kit, but if you do go for that, then it might be worth considering the Drive Assist pack on the options list because it adds adaptive cruise control and steering assist. Jaguar doesn't have the best record when it comes to reliability, but the I-Pace is covered by a 3-year unlimited mileage warranty, which is pretty standard for electric cars. Also common with every other electric car, the battery is covered by a separate warranty. In the I-Pace, that is 8 years or 100,000 miles.
The Jaguar I-Pace was a fantastic electric car when it launched, and the truth is, even now with a new crop of very impressive competitors, it still stacks up very well indeed. It's got a fantastic range, it's a nice thing to drive, and it's plush inside. We can understand if you'd go for an iX3 instead, being even better to drive and cheaper, but the I-Pace is still a very recommendable electric SUV. If Jaguar's bold electric future has this as a starting point, there are plenty of reasons to be excited for its next products. Save thousands of pounds off your next new car on whatcar.com, click on the link, look in our description, or just search for What Car Deals. Leave a comment below telling us what you think of the I-Pace, and make sure you're subscribed to our channel for lots of other new car reviews every week. Thanks for watching.